Hi, my name is Nelson, and welcome to the Sir Nelson Online English channel. The title of the book is David Copperfield. The writer is Charles Dickens. Part 4, Mr. Wickfield, Agnes, and Uriah.
Part 4, Mr. Wickfield, Agnes, and Uriah. I enjoyed living with Aunt Betsy in Dover. Mr. Dick was like a child and loved flying his kite on top of the cliff. But of course, when I was better, she wanted me to continue my education. We went to the old cathedral city of Canterbury near Dover, and she took me to the house of Mr. Wickfield. When we arrived, a strange young man came to hold Miss Betsy's horse. His name was Uriah Heep, Mr. Wickfield's clerk. He was tall and thin, and moved his body like a snake. Mr. Wickfield was Aunt Betsy's lawyer, and was responsible for her money.
Would you like to live with Mr. Wickfield and his daughter Agnes, and go to school near the cathedral with Dr. Strong?
Asked my aunt. Yes, I replied immediately.
Chapter 4, Mr. Wickfield, Agnes, and Uriah. All these are new characters. We have not seen these characters in the other chapters. But who are they? Who are they? Let us read the story. I enjoyed living with Aunt Bessie in Dover. Who enjoyed living with Aunt Bessie? David Copperfield. David Copperfield is the one telling us his story. He enjoyed living with Aunt Bessie in Dover. He came from London. He walked 80 miles to Dover. Mr. Dick was like a child and loved flying his kite on top of the cliff. Of course, we saw Mr. Dick. He had a bald head like, no, sorry, that's not, that is another character. Mr. Dick was like a child and loved flying his kite on top of the cliff. What is a kite? A kite is a paper or anything which children usually they tie a string and start running around with it. That is called a kite. So Mr. Dick enjoyed flying a kite like a kid. But of course, when I was better, she wanted me to continue my education. Remember, David stopped going to school because Mr. Murdstone told him that education was expensive. When David's mother died, he stopped school. They sent him to London to work and learn how to be independent. But in Dover, Aunt Bessie wanted David to continue his education. We went to the old cathedral city of Canterbury. Cathedral means a very big church. A very big church for Christians is called a cathedral. In England, there is a city called Canterbury. It is renowned for big churches, for cathedrals. That's why they call it the old cathedral city of Canterbury, near Dover. And she took me to the house of Mr. Wickfield. We have our first new character. Who is Mr. Wickfield? We shall find out later. When we arrived, who arrived? David and Aunt Bessie arrived in Canterbury. Now they left Dover and went to Canterbury. When we arrived, a strange young man came to hold Miss Bessie's horse. We know there is another man, and we know he is strange. Strange means unusual. Someone who does things that you don't expect. He was a strange young man. His name was Uriah Heep. Now we know Uriah Heep was a young man, a strange young man who came to hold Miss Bessie's horse. Who was Uriah Heep? Mr. Wickfield's clerk. What is the meaning of clerk? A clerk is someone who works in the office. The person who writes letters, receipts, receives, visitors in the office, that person is called a clerk. So Mr. Wickfield had a clerk or a secretary, and his name was Uriah Heep. He was tall and thin and moved his body like a snake. Uriah Heep moved his body like a snake. He was strange. People don't move like that. Mr. Wickfield was Aunt Bessie's lawyer. Yes, so who was Mr. Wickfield? Aunt Bessie's lawyer, and was responsible for her money. So when Aunt Bessie got money, she gave it to Mr. Wickfield. Why? He was her lawyer. Would you like to live with Mr. Wickfield and his daughter Agnes and go to school near the cathedral with Dr. Strong? Asked my aunt. We have two new characters here. We have Agnes and Dr. Strong. Who was Agnes? Agnes was Mr. Wickfield's daughter. Who was Mr. Wickfield? Mr. Wickfield was Aunt Bessie's lawyer. And of course, we know Aunt Bessie. But now we have Dr. Strong. Dr. Strong was a teacher. He had a school near the cathedral. Now, Aunt Bessie asked David if he wanted to go to visit Agnes and Dr. Strong. Yes, he agreed.
The next few years were very happy. Agnes was always calm and always gave me good advice. She was like a sister to me. She loved her father very much and did everything to help him. His wife was dead, and he was very sad without her. My teacher, Dr. Strong, was a generous, intelligent man, and I learnt a lot at his school. I fell in love with Canterbury girls many times as I grew older, had fights with local Canterbury boys, and did all the things that boys usually do. I didn't like Uriah Heep. As the years passed, he began to have a strange power over Mr. Wickfield. "Maybe one day you will be Mr. Wickfield's partner," I said to Uriah. He moved his body like a snake.
No, no, you're very kind, Mr. Copperfield.
The next few years we are very happy. David was very happy in Canterbury. Agnes was always calm. Calm means peaceful, not angry. Agnes was very calm and always gave me good advice. Agnes, who was Agnes? Mr. Wickfield's daughter. Who was Mr. Wickfield? Aunt Bessie's aunt. They lived in Canterbury. Agnes was very good to David Copperfield. She was like a sister to me. She loved her father very much and did everything to help him. Who was her father? Mr. Wickfield. His wife was dead. Whose wife? Mr. Wickfield's wife was dead. So Agnes did not have a mother, and he was very sad without her. My teacher, Dr. Strong, was generous. Generous means kind. You're kind and you share what you have with other people. He was a generous teacher, intelligent man, and I learned a lot at his school. At whose school? At Dr. Strong's school. I fell in love with Canterbury girls many times as I grew older. By now, David was a teenager. Of course, teenager means 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. During that age, young people fall in love. So he fell in love with Canterbury girls, had fights with the local Canterbury boys. Of course, teenagers usually fight over girls, over love, and did all the things that boys usually do. He was happy. He enjoyed his childhood like many. I didn't like Uriah Heep. You remember Uriah Heep? Who was Uriah Heep? Mr. Wickfield's clerk. But what we know, he was tall and thin and he moved his body like a snake. We also know that he was a strange young man. As the years passed, he began to have a strange power over Mr. Wickfield. He had power. He controlled Mr. Wickfield. Maybe one day you'll be Mr. Wickfield's partner. A partner is a person you share a business. You get money and your friend gets money, you put together and you form a business. So now David told Uriah Heep that maybe one day he would be Mr. Wickfield's partner. I say to Uriah, he moved his body like a snake. Who moved his body like a snake? Uriah Heep. No, you are very kind, Mr. Copperfield.
I am much too humble, but please come to visit me and my mother in our humble home.
I met Mrs. Heep. She was exactly like her son,
We are very humble, Mr. Copperfield.
she said. At this time, the Micawbers came to Canterbury. They were very surprised to hear my story. They met Uriah, but soon left Canterbury again because they owed money. Finally, it was time to leave school. Aunt Betsy asked me to decide on a profession.
Visit Peggotty in Yarmouth.
She suggested.
While you are there, think carefully about your future. Then we will decide.
I was a young man now. I travelled to London alone and stayed there before I continued to Yarmouth. At the inn, I was surprised to meet Steerforth. At first, he didn't know me.
Ah, it's Daisy.
He said.
No, you are very kind, Mr. Copperfield. I'm much too humble. Humble means you can also put H. Humble. Humble means not proud, simple. You don't take yourself to be very important. You share with other people, a simple person. Not proud is a humble person. I'm much too humble. Who is humble? Uriah Heep. But please come to visit me and my mother in our humble home, in our simple home. We welcome people. We are not proud. We are good people. We are humble. Come and visit us. Who is saying that? Uriah Heep. Uriah Heep is inviting David Copperfield to go and visit Uriah Heep and his mother. I met Mrs. Heep. Mrs. Heep was Uriah Heep's mother. She was exactly like her son. They spoke the same way, they walked the same way, they did the same things. We are very humble, Mr. Copperfield. She also said they were very humble. They were very simple people. They were not proud, she said. At this time, the Micawbers, I hope you remember the Micawbers. The Micawbers, when Mr. Murdstone told David that education was expensive, David was sent to London to learn how to work. In London, David lived with the Micawbers, Mr. and Mrs. Micawber and their children. But remember, Mr. Micawber always owed money to the shopkeepers. He was taken to prison, and one day they left and went to Plymouth. David had no one to stay with in London. He decided to run away. So he remembered his only relative in the world, Aunt Bessie. So he had to move 80 miles from London to Dover. Mr. Micawber helped David in London. They stayed together, but Mr. Mikoba had very many problems. So now Mr. Mikoba is back in chapter 4. At this time, the Mikobas came to Canterbury. They were very surprised to hear my story. They met Uriah, but soon left Canterbury again because they owed money. Mr. Mikoba always spent more money than he had. That is a very bad habit. So everywhere he went, he always had problems with money. Again, he had to run away from Canterbury because of owing money. Finally, it was time to leave school. Aunt Bessie asked me to decide on a profession. A profession is what to do. A profession is a job to do. Teacher, doctor, lawyer, those are called professions. So after school, Aunt Bessie told David Copperfield to think about a profession. Visit Pigotty in Yarmouth. She suggested to him that he should visit Pigotty. Who is Pigotty? Remember Pigotty? Mr. Bakis's wife. Also Pigotty, the servant. Remember, Pigotty was there when David Copperfield was being born. But after the death of David's mother, the Madistons said that they did not need a servant. So Pigotty had to leave. So David, Aunt Bessie advised him to go and visit Pigotty in Yarmouth. While you are there, think carefully about your future. Decide your profession. Then we will decide. I was a young man now, of course, after school. He was in his 20s now. I traveled to London alone and stayed there before I continued to Yarmouth. Who lived in Yarmouth? Pigotty. So before he traveled to Yarmouth, he went to London. At the inn means a small hotel, I was surprised to meet Steerforth. Remember Steerforth? Traddles and Steerforth at the school. Remember the school? Who was the headmaster? Yes, that cruel man who always punished David Copperfield. Steerforth was David's friend at Mr. Crickle's school, if you remember. At first, he didn't know me. It's Daisy. Remember, he always called him Daisy. Daisy meaning a flower. So he remembered him. But at first, he had forgotten because now he was a man. He was in 20s. He had last seen him very many years before.
I was very happy to see him. I invited him to come to Yarmouth with me.
I'm studying at Oxford, but I have a few free days,
He said.
I'd like to meet these fishermen.
I met Steerforth's mother, a very arrogant lady, and her companion, Rosa Dartle. Then we left for Yarmouth.
I was very happy to see him. Remember at school, he was his hero. He protected David from other students. He always protected David from even the teachers. So he was so happy to see his childhood friend. I invited him to come to Yarmouth with me. So he wanted to go to visit Pigotty with Steerforth. I'm studying at Oxford, but I have a few free days. He was now at university, Oxford University, he said. Who was studying at Oxford? Steerforth. I would like to meet those fishermen. He's calling them fishermen, the family of Pigotty. I met Steerforth's mother, a very arrogant. Arrogant means proud, not humble. Arrogant, someone who says bad words to hurt you. Someone who thinks that is very rich, very successful, and will use bad language about people. So the mother was very arrogant. Steerforth's mother was very arrogant, and her companion means friend, Rosa Datto. We have a new character. Rosa Datto was Steerforth's mother's friend or companion. Then we left for Yarmouth. David and Steerforth went to Yarmouth to visit visit Peggotty and her family. That is the end of chapter 4. Now, pause the video, go to your WhatsApp group and start typing the answers to these questions, 1 up to 6. Read the question, answer the questions in full sentences. Pause the video, go to the WhatsApp group and start typing the answers. 7, 8, and 9, pause the video, go to the WhatsApp group and start typing the answers. See you next time. Bye-bye.